not showing up now. There we go. All right, good.
All set?
We're
Okay, so when was the last time we met? 2 months ago. So this is the regular meeting of the Plattsburgh Parking Advisory Committee, February 11, 2020. It's 6 o'clock. We've got a quorum, so I'll go down and take the roll. Matt Miller's here. Levi?
Here.
Mike? Not yet. Joe? Rodney?
Here.
Ethan?
Yep.
Kate?
Yep.
Pat, not here yet. Marianne, I don't think Marianne's coming. Okay, as far as comments from the chair, just a brief update. Since the last time we met, the final generic environmental impact statement has been adopted by the council. And very soon, we should have the council adopt the finding statement of the GEIS, and that will complete the GEIS process, and then we can move on to the individual projects. Some of them are city-sponsored and subject to different levels of review than other ones which involve private parties. But the parking is going to be a part of most of those projects, and we'll continue to discuss that as we go through the next several months. But right now, I'll open the floor up to public comment on any of the items on the agenda tonight. You brought the dog. Mike Bissett and Pat McFarland have arrived. Seeing no public comments on.
I think it might be more appropriate if we make comments after we hear the positions on some of these issues.
Yeah, whichever one you prefer.
Either places we're happy to speak.
That's up to you.
Then we'll wait.
You'll wait? Okay. All right, so item 1, report from Chief Ritter detailing current parking system enforcement statistics. Chief?
So I have the December package. I'll just go over it briefly. December last year, there was no parking enforcement in place, so of the, well, go back to 2018, there were 11 tickets issued. Last year was 185. 185, I don't know if that's going to be the December number, but we had more snow events last year than we have this year, and that may impact the amount of tickets that are issued. So it's hard to know just on straight enforcement because we're really talking about time to parking and parking ban tickets, which they're all into one number, so.
Gotcha.
January is kind of the same thing, although the 2019 January number was because the first week of January was the implementation of the parking officer.
Yeah, and everybody was still getting used to it.
And so 500 tickets issued in January of last year. That would be representative of a lot of people learning through the Enforcement Act. This year it being 229. Again, it's hard to know if that's the settling point for monthly enforcement in January, or if that has an influence in parking ban tickets as well. But it at least looks like there's a spot where the amount of tickets are settling into, even a year after.
Okay. And as far as year-end 2019, what was the total amount of revenue collected?
I don't have it on this. I can get that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Chief?
Just a comment. I find it curious that by far and away the largest number of infractions are violation of the parking ban. It's not because people are parking too long in the parking spots. It's really the parking ban for snow removal.
Thank you.
No problem.
That was me over this weekend, so I got one. So
Did you get towed?
oh yeah,
You got
I got
towed.
some. I got
That
some.
makes me happy.
Yeah.
So year-to-date, last year, $55,235.
55,235?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Save me from looking it up.
Yeah. I'm quick on the draw.
So that sounds, based on salary and the benefit multiplier, right around revenue neutral for the enforcement, maybe a little.
The salary is less than that. Not, I think it's just under 50,000. So
Okay, so maybe a little more once you account the benefits.
yeah. If we're just
Gotcha, yeah.
obviously yes, we're just talking salary, yes, but benefits included, no.
Okay. Any other comments?
It's good to see the tickets going down. I think that's promising. We'll see, like you said, it's not necessarily guaranteed by anything, but if it's 500 one month and last year, and then, that's a good trend. I like that. Less tickets in general.
Yeah, I mean, it was never the intention to penalize people, it's just a way to effectively manage the system.
And that was a lot of the work that you did over the course of the summer, finding out, okay, well, these are the concerns of, is there even parking? And I did a lot of research trying to find a specific point in the history of the city of Plattsburgh when the parking meters were removed for Mr. Brody.
Mm-hmm.
And along that way, I found a lot of back and forth on what the best way to enforce parking was. It was eye-opening, but yeah, I mean, they went through periods where there was no enforcement in the 70s and 80s, and they always came back to, it can't manage itself. There needs to be something, but ideally, like, 0 tickets is probably the best if it can function.
If possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little utopian, but
Yeah, it's,
but yeah,
And
And
that
the
was
enforcement, oh, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
the year that the last time they took out the parking meters, that was 79, maybe even earlier than that. I'm trying to remember, I think it was in the,
it was. I believe it was the early 80s.
Early
because
80s.
it was
In the tenure of John Iannelli,
it was the arrival of the Pyramid Mall that
Okay.
it coincided with that.
got it.
70s.
Pyramid Mall?
78.
The original
Malls.
mall,
You haven't been here long
enough.
because that was the concern that the mall was going to kill the downtown businesses, and having meters there would, no one would park there. They even had businesses would have jars of coins for the people that patronized the business to take a nickel, dime, or quarter and
Feed the meter.
yes. So they're doing everything that they could to keep the downtown business district kind of afloat with the thought that the Pyramid Mall was going to come and wipe it out.
Okay.
The
Okay.
enforcement makes a huge, huge difference. About 2 years ago, it was getting dicey downtown. I had patients driving around, not coming in, because they could not find a spot anywhere within 2 blocks.
So
And
this
as
is
soon as it came back, everyone there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, but I cheered because it was like, oh, thank goodness, there's going to be a parking enforcement person again, and immediately clears right up. It takes a little while for people to figure it out. People get stressed about it, but the enforcement of the 2-hour limits is critical.
It moved a lot of people, and we didn't do any counts before implementation of it, but it moved people from on-street to off-street.
sure, I mean,
Because they didn't have to watch they didn't have to look at the
Yes.
time. They knew that they were safe if they thought they were going to be there longer than 2 hours.
People would park in front of my business on Brinkerhoff
All
for
day
3
long.
days.
Yeah,
3 days,
yeah.
4 days. At about 5 days, I would call, and y'all would tell.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at the differences in the usage statistics from the Carl Walker study, which was done in 2018
It was
before
huge.
we resumed enforcement, versus the ones that we've observed over the past 12 months, it's huge.
it's explained by enforcement.
Yeah,
It's
there's
a
no other
rational
reason for it.
explanation for why that parking utilization has changed.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and even the history of the city has shown that
Yeah.
they've always come back to some sort of enforcement because it's just swung to what you've seen over and over, that parking downtown, they're parking right in front of prime spots without any
It certainly changed parking for county employees.
Tremendous.
They would park all day long on the street because it was closer to the front entrance of where they worked. And once you had the ban, most of them moved into the county parking lot.
All good?
It's no wonder that's the number one point in the parking study.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to discussion of the FGEIS. Just a quick show of hands, who sitting here has read the FGEIS?
I didn't read all of it, but I read the important stuff.
Okay.
That's
Ethan, would you
long.
want to bring up the document just in? So from what people have read, was there anything in particular that you wanted to discuss tonight? Anything that you perhaps wanted additional clarification on? Any issues related to parking?
I focused on the parking section. I actually printed out all of the comments on the parking section.
Yeah, there were a lot.
I guess my primary comment is that they seem to treat, when they're giving the statistics, they seem to refer to them collectively. So the on-street and the off-street parking spots collectively. They didn't distinguish between the two when they were talking about capacity and demand and supply. And I happen to think that there's a big difference. And there's going to be, I think there's a big difference now that enforcement is occurring. And there's going to be a big difference in the future if the Common Council agrees with this committee and they have pay stations in the off-street lots, but not on-street parking. So my only comment is that, I think to do a more detailed job, you would need to distinguish between the supply and the demand for both on-street and off-street. I happen to believe that off-street parking is going to get much tighter as a result of the project, more so than on-street parking. I do think that there's enough parking, but I think it's going to be much closer, obviously, than it is now. I think there'll be plenty of on-street parking.
Well, the difference between on-street and off-street is really how it's enforced, so that can be changed, Right now, if we keep 2-hour limits on on-street parking and right now it's unlimited, time on off-street parking and 2-hour limits on on-street parking, of course, they're gonna be very different. If we do 2-hour limits on all of them, then I think they'd be treated roughly the same. If we put kiosks on all of them, I think they'd be treated roughly the
Yeah,
same.
and I'm only going according to the recommendations that we made. The Common Council hasn't made a decision yet on all our recommendations, so it's hard to tell
Yeah.
what that management system's gonna look like.
Mm-hmm. And actually, what we're looking at here is a table from the FGEIS. And this is also included in a supplemental memo that the city sent to the Common Council for their consideration. A lot of the comments that we received in response to the draft GEIS expressed concern about the way that the city was accounting for the compensatory parking supply. So this is the city's, why don't you just bring up the memo, Ethan?
instead, or the, Matt,
Hmm?
you want the memo, or,
Yeah, bring up the memo, that's easier to,
because the memo is attached in the FGIS, it's in Appendix F, and it's referenced in this parking section as well.
yeah. And a lot of people were, again, concerned that there were issues with the way that the city was accounting for it. So rather than getting into a debate about what constitutes a new parking space, we felt that the most effective way to respond to this was, instead of entering into that debate, simply utilizing the assertions made in the comments in the DGEIS. The two biggest ones were that the city was essentially double counting the 50 public parking spaces to be installed on the Durkee Street Municipal Parking Lot within the mixed-use development, and also that the 65 new spaces that we were counting, 69 new spaces now in the county lot, should have been counted as 44 because that more accurately reflected the total new number of spaces. So by the city's accounting, within the special assessment district, once all of these projects are done, there will be a total amount of public parking supply of 20 spaces less than currently exists right now. If we utilize all the assertions in the comments of the DGEIS, that number increases to a deficit of 95 spaces. And again, we're just accepting those assertions for the sake of argument. And the point that we're trying to make is that even if all of those assertions were true, that the existing parking supply within the SAD and the observed parking demand that Ethan and Pat have observed through the course of, what was it, 121 parking counts over the course of a year? And that's on-street and off-street, that the SAD, even at peak utilization, times of peak utilization, has more than enough existing parking to absorb that perceived loss of 95 spaces. So this is a summary of those many parking counts and what they look like over the course of a typical weekday in downtown Plattsburgh. Now, we also did a number of weekend counts, but understandably, those utilization rates were considerably lower than observed during the week because we're not having to accommodate employees on the weekends. But if you look at this table, it shows that the peak utilization period occurs between 1 and 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And at that period, even at peak utilization within the SAD, right now, there are 278 unoccupied parking spaces that nobody is using.
And I'm gonna just say, once again, this is all just averages from counts. So there might be days where that number, that 278, is a little lower. There might be days where that's a little higher. That's just the average of all the counts that were done at that time.
Do you have a low? What was the absolute least, just out of curiosity, do you have off the top of your head?
Well, probably, for example, the least would be 8, if you're talking about what time of the day.
Spaces available.
Not average,
what's the lowest count between 1 and 2?
Instead of the total vacant spaces being 278, what was the
very
low
worst?
number?
What was the very worst?
I could double check and email that all out. I don't have that on top of my head right now.
We even added up like on each lot, when it was the fullest. There was still quite a bit of vacancy, but that was months ago.
Are we talking over 100 spaces still? I mean, just ball.
Oh yeah, I'd be more than comfortable saying that, because even at the peak utilization of the Durkee Street lot, if you say that I've observed, and it's also reflected in the Carl Walker study as well, which is the 87%. 87% of 289 spaces is still at 40 available spaces.
Yeah, roughly.
It doesn't look 40 like there's 40 available spaces because there's 1 or 2 here, there's 1 or 2 here. So
Yeah, somebody in my office had commented to me the other day that he was walking through the lot, and he said when you looked at the lot, the first blush when you looked at the lot, it looked like it was virtually
looks
full.
full.
He says when you walk through the lot, it's surprising how many vacant spaces there are that you really didn't notice when you looked at it in its entirety.
And that's one of those things that, and it's the same thing when you look at the whole SAD. Yes, on certain streets that are the busiest, like Margaret Street, or you give Clinton Street for an example, when you look at the spaces where most people have, where a lot of the businesses are, where a lot of people park, yes, that's where most people want to park because it's closest to where they are. There are sections of parking that are available, sometimes a little farther away, and such as some of the sections of the Broad Street lot that I've observed, as well as you have Oak Street, which is in the SAD. So it's really a question of just, when we talk about managing the supply in the future, is how do we get some of the long-term parkers in those further parking spaces and treat those as long-term without negatively impacting those
long-term on-street parking as far away as possible within the SAD, but away from businesses that need parking close to their front doors, restaurants and shops.
So these are all averages, once again, just to count. Someone could go out tomorrow, and if someone did the count and they found out there's 230, I would love that information. That would be useful for all of us, just because the more information, we can make more accurate, assumptions, and we can build better models. So that's.
When's the last count you did?
I did one January 2nd of this year.
Of this year? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And a couple in December as well.
Well, there was a couple times I would text Ethan, the parking lot was full, fuller than I've ever seen it. Go do a count, and even then it was 67%. I mean, people were posting online when they were still public. Look, the parking lot's full. It's Cinco de Mayo, and they'd show a picture, and the parking lot looks full from that perspective. And you go do the count 10 minutes later, and the parking lot's less than a third full. So that parking lot often looks full, but it often is full. 87% is pretty full.
And we're not, on no means by I'm saying people aren't using parking in their downtown.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that we have the supply of currently the 820 spaces that we have, is that there are available parking as a total supply number that we have the supply, as Matt said, when even you assume all the assertions that were made and contrast of the DGIS to satisfy the overall parking demand that we currently see now.
Yep.
But I mean, the way I look at it, and I know I sound like a broken record every meeting, but whether it's 20 lost or 95 lost, and I mean, there must be some way to actually figure out which it is. We're taking a parking lot that the downtown uses, whether it's 87% full or 67% full, and we're giving it away. It's just ludicrous to me. And I feel like that just keeps getting lost, and we break it down to this minutia. But I mean, the bottom line is whether it's 20 spaces that the downtown loses or 95 spaces that the downtown loses.
Well, we're talking about the sale of a parking lot that generates currently no tax revenue for the city and actually costs downtown property owners upwards of $40,000 to $50,000 a year in maintenance costs in the form of an SAD levy, and replacing it with a mixed-use development, which over the course of 20 years, and I don't have the pilot numbers off the top of my head, but it's several $100,000s in property taxes within the city coffers that wouldn't be there otherwise.
And
Maybe.
we're not saying that, we all know that people, we discussed that people use that parking, so we understand there is a value attached to that parking.
Sure.
So with the city moving forward with this development, the goal is, with the way we showed these numbers, is we can have the development, still satisfy the parking in the short term. In the long term, if we need more parking, the city and this group, this PPAC, whether it's us or the next people, the lucky ones who get put in onto this committee, will be looking at all the parking and be like, hey, you know what, 2 years from now, we want more parking, let's try to build this. I know, Joe, you mentioned the parking garage a lot. There might be a time in 3 or 4 years where
We
say,
may have to build the Rotella parking garage.
And but you know, the thing is with
That would be a good
with-
thing.
With the parking lot, the Durkee Street lot, I mean, the debt was paid for, the debt on that lot was paid for by a special assessment district.
Mm-hmm.
The city didn't pay anything, the debt's been paid for years. You know, so the city giving that away, in a sense, to this project. So what is the special assessment district getting back in return?
Well, to be fair,
How
the
fair?
downtown property owners paid into the special assessment district for the maintenance on that lot
No,
because the special
It paid-
assessment
it paid
district.
the debt first.
Yes, but those payments were in lieu of the requirement that those property owners provide enough off-street parking on their own properties per the city code. So it's more of a communal use of parking, and it's a communal way of paying for it.
Do you know when those started, Joe, those special assessment district?
I don't know,
I
I've
think
had
it was
property
in the
since
67.
67, and
since
they
the
amended it 2 or
70s
3 times after
downtown.
that.
So
Oh.
I don't know when it's done, I just know I pay. You know,
Yeah.
I'm getting screwed on a kiss, I guess.
Well, and downtown businesses are dropping like flies in the past 6 months. I don't know if the Common Council is aware, but Kinetic Running is gone, Trinity Yoga is gone, Captain's Team Shop is gone,
Yeah,
Samet Shop is gone, Grizzlies is moving,
and that
Key
is,
Bank's leaving.
and
That's
those
why
developments have
downtown
occurred.
needs-
That's why I
Yeah,
think
that's-
you make the
They have
argument
more
that
than
you
enough
need this
parking.
project.
You need
Because
it.
you need to reinvigorate downtown.
I mean, even with the overabundance of
Will it?
parking that we have those businesses falling off and not
Yep.
being able to succeed. And
Businesses are leaving because of the perception that this parking crunch is gonna kill their businesses.
I-
Some are just dying, and some are leaving.
Because of
They're
the
leaving.
perceived.
have you heard definitively that
parking
any
crunch.
business has left downtown because of the proposed?
That's what I'm sure they'd love to say.
Absolutely.
Because no one wants the embarrassment of their business. But businesses often fail. Businesses
Sure,
fail for
yeah.
a number of reasons.
Sure.
But for a business to leave now or to leave over the last year and blaming on parking is disingenuous to a huge degree.
I mean, I think it's disingenuous of you to claim to know that.
Fine.
You know, I mean, you can't get into people's heads and say, "Oh, it's a likely excuse." I mean, maybe it is and maybe it's not, but we can't
There
say
hasn't been a parking
definitively.
crunch.
Well, there's been a perception that there will be,
Yeah.
and when people go to renew their leases, they sure have that in mind.
I don't think anyone can say, certainly not definitively, that this
Exactly.
project is gonna be good for downtown or it's gonna be bad for downtown.
Right.
None of us really know. We all have our our beliefs and our perceptions of, you know, what may happen. But, you know, we really don't, no one really knows exactly what's gonna happen.
Yeah. And it's not fair for us to try to divine one way or the other why a business owner made a decision or another, so.
And as a
Have you talked
property
to
owner,
them?
as a property owner,
We'll talk to a
Yeah.
few, yeah.
I'll have I have possibility of vacant space down the road, who knows? But yet, it's killing us more, we're still paying special assessment. A lot of people are worried about the project, and I have a tenant that says, hey, they build this, I'm moving. You know, then we gotta pay the registration department, we gotta pay for inspection. You know, what's gonna end, where's it end for the property owners downtown?
I guess
And
that's
is,
the
and is
council's
the special
decision, though, you know,
assessment
that's
district
not really
gonna
this
be
committee.
gotten rid of? Are they gonna get rid of the special assessment district when this project starts?
Well,
Or
that's
we gotta
kind of
keep
what we're
paying and
supposed to
paying
be
and paying?
discussing.
Yeah, that's
Well,
kind
it's
of
a
what we're
recommendation we
supposed to.
made.
Yeah, that's a recommendation.
To get rid
The
of it?
final decision's not made here.
With the
Yeah.
implementation of a managed system. So when we talked about issuing the permits in replace of permits and kiosks in replace of the SAD.
Yep, so that's a more equitable way to pay for it. It's the users of the system rather than simply property owners who happen to own property downtown.
The
Actually-
question, the
To get
question,
off topic, when there's two sides to this here. We're here really just to make a recommendation about parking. We can argue till we're blue in the face about the use of the lot. Everyone here at the table has an opinion, in the public. Okay, we all have different feelings, some align, some don't. And, you know, and we can all appreciate the people who obviously want the lot to remain, and then there's a side about developing it. But really, I think we gotta get back to what we're here for. I mean, We show up here and we were tasked with just that, trying to come up with a recommendation that will suit it best. Now, if there's concerns at this table, I think that they should go to the council and express those concerns, because it's not gonna get resolved here. Joe, and I agree with, I agree with everything that Joe says, you know? I love a parking garage. I think that, yes, there's merit in the fact that, yeah, over time, you put money into the special assessment district, and you basically paid for a good portion of that parking lot out of your rent, but that's not what this is for here. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
So
I mean,
I
I
think we
guess-
need to get back on topic and finish this thing up.
I think I would just assert that if we are coming up, whether it be 20 short or 95 short, we've sort of failed. The committee is not really.
but
come
did
through.
we fail if we have 95 short, but we don't need those 95
Yeah.
spaces?
Well, but if this development is supposed to bring so much to downtown, then the existing demand won't be adequate as it is. If this is this huge boon for downtown,
Well, yes, and we'll be continually
hopefully
monitoring
it is.
the demand, and as it increases, we will have additional options ready to increase the public parking supply.
I
Every
guess will it be
thrive,
quick enough though if the downtown really starts to suffer?
But what you're talking about is the need to come up with a plan for managing parking.
No.
Okay.
Because if we're talking about overbuilding parking for the sake of being able to say that we're replacing every parking spot that we're losing on the Durkee lot, I mean, on a certain level, that's a disservice to the taxpayers, because every lot that we have to pay to create is an extra $6,000 to $9,000 out of the public coffers,
Why isn't Prime helping with that? I mean, they're the ones,
because they're providing enough parking for their own needs on the site.
but they're taking away 289.
The trade-off in this situation would be that the development, besides it coming back on the tax parcels, yes, there's a pilot agreement, which I'm sure we've all seen in newspapers and meetings and all that fun stuff. The idea is that the benefits from this project, such as being back on the tax parcel, such as helping bring in residents and potential new commercial space in the downtown to help the downtown as a whole, outweigh the adjustments to parking.
Maybe
But-
it does and maybe it doesn't.
And that's something where everyone here has a different opinion about that, and that's what Mike said, and that's what we all know that.
There's also an argument to be made that every few superfluous parking spaces that exist in a dense downtown like this, that's one less opportunity for a restaurant to open, for somebody to build a small apartment unit, something like that. It's just,
Oh, you're talking about a lot, not on street.
yeah, a lot. It's just wasted space. All right, so I wanted to move on to the utilization rates in the parking memo here. So based on what we've seen, the current condition at peak utilization, there's 278 open spaces and there's 820 total public spaces within the SAD. So that's a peak utilization rate of 60, 6.1%. And if you remember from the Carl Walker parking study, anything below 85%, you've either got as much parking as you need or far more parking than you need. 85% is the sweet spot that you want to try and hit, where there's always at least one space available on every block. So, again, utilizing the assertions from the comments in the DGIS and accepting, for the sake of argument, that there will be 95 fewer public parking spaces after everything is completed, that would result in an SAD-wide utilization rate at peak utilization of only 74.8%. So that's well below 85%, which means that even if everything, all the comments in the DGIS were true about how the city was accounting for its parking, the existing capacity and the capacity that will exist after all these projects are completed can more than absorb that loss in parking without any adverse effect on the ability of people to find parking downtown.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that people are gonna have the same walk to the reason they came downtown. Some may be shorter, some may be a little longer. You know, but there should be reasonable parking spaces within a reasonable walking distance of their destination.
And for any rearrangement of parking this significant, certain number of people are going to wind up with a longer walk from their car to their office. A certain number of people are going to wind up with a shorter walk. It's, the luck of the draw based on where you work and where you park, but in the end, it's going to be a much better way to utilize parking within the downtown area. The one other thing I wanted to talk about as far as recommendation to the council, the recommendation regarding the elimination of the special assessment district. We've had discussions in my office over the past several months about the two different parts of the SAD, which is the actual legal mechanism which creates the district, which prevents several hundred lots within the district being non-conforming because they don't meet the off-street parking requirements because they can't because it's so dense. And the separate second part, which is the levy that pays for the upkeep of the public lots. Now, certainly doing away with the levy is a recommendation I think we can all agree with sending to the council and then having the users of the system pay for it going forward. But as far as the establishment and the continuation of the special assessment district itself, there is an argument to be made that keeping that part of it in place so that several hundred non-conforming lots would not be immediately created with the repeal of that district, and that causes a lot of other problems for zoning. It would also essentially be the end of any potential development opportunities in the downtown core because nobody could meet the off-street parking requirements if it weren't for the SAD.
Yeah, this is discussions that we had with the building inspector, who would deal with the zoning board as well, and that was keeping the structure of the SAD, which in part has had success of making sure that there isn't a bunch of just demolish a building, just build a parking lot right next to one of your own buildings. So in that effect, this SAD has been very successful. So by keeping the structure of the SAD and then swapping out how it's funded, which goes from the property owners to the users, that's how that system goes forward. So the SAD exists, but it's not from the property owners.
So you're not going to assess a tax as a result of the SAD, even though the SAD would continue.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Just based
the
on the
idea.
requirement for parking spaces for a business, right?
Yep.
Just get rid of parking minimums.
It leaves us the flexibility that the SAD provides for planning purposes without burdening the property owners with the cost of paying for the system.
So this was what I was highlighted, just what, in August, when we were here, and some of us who are no longer here as well, and we decided and voted to make this recommendation to the council. Of course, this recommendation was also pending the
So are
completion
you
of the
looking,
GAs.
are you looking for a revision of our recommendation?
Potentially, yeah. Not at
Or
this
more
meeting,
detailed
but certainly,
than
yeah.
this.
Because if, I'll say what I would agree to. I would agree to changing it so that a tax associated with a special assessment district be eliminated once the parking management system is in place. So it doesn't say that the special assessment district is eliminated, but the tax generation portion of that would be eliminated.
And we would want to double check with the city attorney
That's
to make
acceptable.
sure there are any legal landmines there, but yeah, I think that's something I could definitely endorse as well. Any further comments on this or the memo we were just discussing or the FGEIS?
I would say that it took a long time wading through the comments on the
Yeah, there were a lot,
GIS.
yeah.
But they were kind of illuminating, in terms of determining the viewpoints that are out there. And I do think that, based on the response, some of the comments were resulted in some changes. And I think, for instance, the memo that you showed us here, the numbers in here are a little bit more conservative. Yeah, not this one, but the one you just showed us. I think they're a little bit more accurate reflection of what will exist in reality after the project is in place. And I think it's important, because there could be charges of deception, that might be legitimate, that I think that you need to be able to defend your numbers. I think those numbers are a lot more defensible in that memo.
Yep. And the city's accounting, utilizing assertions in the DGEIS, anywhere in between. The fact remains that the parking that exists now, the parking that will exist after all of the GEIS projects are done, is more than capable of absorbing that loss without adverse effects on the downtown.
I'm going to ask this question even though you've answered it because I think it's important. What if it doesn't? What if we either have a boon in parking demand, or something that we've missed has resulted in an imbalance of the people who need to park all day versus the people that are parking for short periods of time?
We've had discussions with the owners of private lots within the downtown area. We did not feel, the city did not feel at the time that the terms that were being asked were reasonable given the circumstances and the fact that the city had, per our analysis, an overabundance of parking. But if
But they were willing to negotiate.
They were absolutely willing to negotiate. So if that turned out to be true and there was a huge boon in parking demand after these projects are over, the city does have options to pursue additional public supply that would not require the construction of additional lots. We could just simply utilize lots that already exist, in which several of which are drastically underutilized at this point for one reason or another.
And we also just, it's not like we're gonna go from black to white where we have this and then tomorrow, assuming everything, all approvals happen, Prime's building's up and everything's fully occupied and
We're at
everything.
95%.
Even just after assuming Prime goes forward and gets all the approvals from all the various boards and all the financing and all the other steps that they have to move forward, their construction period is still 18 months. And yes, we've already discussed the draft construction plan, but there's still time for this group and others and the council to make there's a time built in to make more decisions and to make more adjustments going forward on parking. Just because the GEIS says this at this moment, or we're right here at this exact moment, there's still gonna be a time for us to observe how parking's happening as the development, assuming once again it's going forward, occurs, make changes as we see fit. And that's a key point, is once we get to the point where we can actually say, hey, we're gonna put these kiosks, we're gonna charge these rates, these are gonna be the permits, all that fun stuff, we see how that all interacts and we get the chance to start making tweaks, or, as Matt said, figure out ways to enhance parking supply through shared use agreements. I know Pat's very favorable of changing how the management style is, maybe
Yes, I am.
you raise the rates, for example, in which, impact how people use parking, but that's the real key for this group, whether it's us or the next people who take our seats, is to make those adjustments and make those recommendations to the council, of course.
Fluctuations are much easier to handle in the management of the parking system rather than changing capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Changing capacity is difficult. Building one parking spot costs $8,000 roughly. And if it sits there not being occupied, that's a waste. Not only is it a waste of the money that you pay, it's a waste of the opportunity cost of those spaces that can be used. And that's the argument about why the parking lot is being transferred to something that is a benefit to the city and it can increase vitality. Certainly parking has a benefit, but it also has a negative. I'll put an analogy to a restaurant. If you own a restaurant, you want all of your seats full in the restaurant. If you have 50 seats in the restaurant, you don't want 10 people coming in and, you know, and people look at 40 empty seats, they think your restaurant's not successful.
Probably isn't.
No, probably, it certainly isn't. And that's where the strong towns people say, like, the one thing worse than having a problem is never having a parking problem. Osable Forks doesn't have a parking problem because no one ever wants to go there. But if you're, but what do you do if you become too full? If all 50 of your spots are being taken up and there's a line forming down the block of people that want to come eat at your restaurant, what do? Well, first thing, do you open a new restaurant right away? Maybe. But you might want to raise your prices first or something along that and start saving up money to then switch to a bigger restaurant. And that's where Joe's idea of a parking garage is, that would be the best thing for this city if the parking demand produced a situation where we needed to build a parking garage. It's not something that you do right at the front, and because if you build a parking garage where it costs $30,000 per space and it's not being used, then it's a huge cost to the city. But if we can have the parking manage itself so that it provides adequate care and can deal with changes in demand, make some money perhaps to put away for future parking capacity increase, that's, I think, the best thing that could happen. If the parking is demanded, if as you say, if this project leads to more demand, where more people are coming to the city and we face a parking shortage, that would be the best thing that could happen to the city, because then we can deal with that and it shows that people are coming downtown. People don't come downtown to park. People come downtown because there's places they want to go. There's restaurants they want to patronize. Maybe there's retail they want to patronize. Maybe they want to have an office downtown. But the city being successful will necessitate building more parking. And there's a lot of ways to deal with parking demand. We've discussed them all. I know it's been months since we haven't maybe discussed them all, but we've discussed a bunch of them about then building more capacity, building more parking lots that will only be full on Black Friday or 4th of July and are empty for most of the other time. To adequately face that demand, there's a lot of ways to deal with capacity. We've talked about parking cash outs for employers. We've talked about decoupling parking for apartment owners. Certainly the other discussion there is transit. Public transit sometimes comes into play. There's a lot of ways to deal with small fluctuations in demand, and the best option is not always to just build excess capacity to make sure that we have enough parking for the busiest time we could possibly see. That's my opinion on that, and I think the managed parking system has to be, and like I said earlier in this meeting, there's a reason it's the #1 recommended thing in the parking study. And that's what he says, you have 3 options. One is don't change much and require people to park in the harbor lots. That's an option. And the harbor lot is not a very convenient
That's not a practical option.
No. But it is there
It's there,
for
but,
desperation. Create necessary downtown parking and administer a free parking system that does not charge patrons for use. City bears all the costs of creating and managing parking. Or 3, create necessary downtown parking and administer a paid parking system that changes threes. Option 1 provides lower levels of customer service. Option 2 is not financially feasible. Option 3 provides high levels of customer service and has revenue to help costs. So we spent most of our time in this committee discussing the capacity issue. Where do we replace parking? Where is it best to replace parking? I know the parking study talks about one of the best options here is he thinks, and I talked with John Forster a number of times when he was last here, that changing this parking will be a more balanced system throughout downtown, rather than having this huge well of parking at the southeast end of the downtown where people can park. And are you happy if you have to park near the Gateway building to go to Iris's or go somewhere downtown? No. You want to park right where you can go, but the most important thing is that we manage the parking system effectively, and that there's enough capacity to handle it. Certainly you can have none. If we had no parking, the city would be in a problem. But I think we're replacing enough parking. If we need to increase capacity in the future, because that's a problem, then that seems like a good thing.
We
Indeed.
spend a lot of time talking about parking theories and all that. We have made a series of suggestions and recommendations to council, some which are tied to the GES completion. So obviously, we've had a lot of these meetings, that's why we stopped having some meetings, because the GES process. And we're gonna find out soon, once the GES process is complete, and council can start looking at recommendations, say yes or no, and then that can give us more of a focused order of, hey, the council said we do wanna move forward this way, now we need to work more specifically on how exactly the permits are gonna work, how all that's gonna get those more details. So that's something that hopefully we can look forward to, instead of just, as Pat's saying, just the capacity issue, depending on how the council looks at the recommendations that we have already made from our August meeting, to start doing some more specific work, so that we don't, it's not all just theory, we can start talking about actually what might happen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You know, Pat, you said that this project is beneficial for downtown.
Absolutely.
You know, what is this company's track record? Do we know?
Sure.
Them sitting,
You can go look at their other projects.
you know, but
They have a number of successful
Yeah,
projects.
they manage over 2,000 residential units.
we don't know. The average person doesn't know what they are, what they've done. So you've got the public saying, well, you know, we know nothing about it. They took a name, Plattsburgh Prime or Prime Plattsburgh, whatever, you know, and they don't know. But yet, I just think that this, and it's off base, I shouldn't, this $10 million that the grant the city got, why didn't they start at the waterfront? There's been a project approved at the waterfront for a hotel, conference center, all approved.
Well, look what happens, so the farmer's market wanted to move down, and we
Yeah,
get a
but
lot of
my point
complaints
is,
about that.
it's already
But
been
the
approved.
The city didn't decide where to allocate funds, that was the
Yeah,
state
that
that
was the
decided
state.
where to allocate the funds. Because the state thought that
The city
downtown
included the development of the brownfield parcel down by the
is
waterfront, but the state
very
decided to,
sparsely funded.
yeah.
They, they give $800,000?
No, to that, it was just for the study, it was 150K.
And that project's already, there's already been a project approved for down there. What I'm saying is the developer came in, he wanted to build a hotel, conference center to park at the waterfront down here. At the time, I chaired the planning board, we gave him approvals, he had all the approvals. He had to compact the land, he compacted the land, and then the money market fell out, no money. But there's an approval, land's been all ready to go. Started waterfront work on.
Somebody's gotta wanna do it.
If someone wants to do it,
Yeah.
we'll certainly talk
Yeah, but
about it.
we should find somebody. But
that's
I just
working
think,
on
I
that,
just think is, you know, we're hedging around it. In time, we're gonna need a parking garage. When we made 14 Durkee Street, when they wanted to build that building, you had to replace a number of parking spaces that footprint you took up, and they built that parking, tiered parking in the back.
Oh, at the Gateway building?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, all right, they built that, no qualms, they did it. It's,
But how long did that go, Joe? And I remember that.
I mean, how long-
They dug a hole there.
no, they.
No, I remember, because I'm the one that actually did the good part of that building. I built the parking garage, I did the foundation for it, did the site work. But ahead of that, Clyde came in and dug that out and remediated that site, and it sat idle for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
That was the fire
And
department.
how did it
reviewed.
how did it affect everything going on downtown? I don't recall it ever, I mean, I lived in the city, I was living on Leonard Ave, so I didn't have the occasion to park down there, but I never found it very inconvenient having that. It was fenced off.
So that section of the parking lot, that was just an
Yeah,
empty hole for years?
it was a left open excavation, because I actually went back and I had to finish
But
cleaning up,
about-
I cleaned up the hole, and then we put foundations in, then we built the parking garage. And then ICV came over and then built the building, or they had contractors build the building, but I don't recall ever putting a crunch. I mean, how was parking before? I mean, I guess Rodney, did you answer that question for social services? that would have probably been a lot of overflow for your social services people.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever an issue.
No, it didn't affect it, and it was like nothing ever happened. I do remember there just being a big open hole there fenced in for a long, but it might have been a year or 6 months, but
What
it was
year?
quite a while.
What year was that,
That
roughly?
was
Just curious.
And,
late 90s to
yeah.
Early
yeah, 'cause
nineties.
they started building it in
Yeah.
05, I think.
But it sat for a while, and I remember it not adversely affecting, you know,
But
and
there-
even now that the parking garage got built, I made the casual observation that no one parked in it. But then again, they had no businesses in the ICD building, and I don't know how
When they built that building, they replaced that footprint, that's what the garage was for.
Yeah, but they never,
So they charge for parking below
Now they-
ground, and up above is free parking.
they could never fill the building.
And there's rarely cars up there.
Yeah,
There's cars.
No, and in the
Yeah.
garage, it's not even
The
close to
lower
full.
part is mainly for, that they have to pay for, the tenant.
That's right, it's a
Yeah.
tenants
the
only.
tenants only.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But in the beginning, they had a hard time, they couldn't get, the upper floors of that building were not occupied for a long period of time.
yeah, but that was all private money.
Is
They
that,
took the risk.
is it free to park in the upper levels now?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
it's a handshake deal because originally it was written into all the approvals, but that would have made it a public works project. So the Costco, so it's a handshake agreement, you can go up on that first stop floor, 2 hour free Monday through Friday, 7 to 5 p.m. Yeah, so there's 77 parking spaces on that top floor that are available by definition anyway. We haven't counted those in our parking counts specifically for the reason as it's not expressed and it's not city-owned parking. So I have done some counts of that and it's fluctuated where I've seen 22 cars out of that 77 and I've seen times where it's 50. So it really fluctuates based on just the uses of the time. So I would have to do much more counts before I personally would feel comfortable saying how it was used, but.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, everybody okay moving on to item number 3? Okay. All right, updates on the schedule for the parking projects. Ethan, could you pull up the site plans, please? So the Durkee Street reconfiguration and the addition of the parallel on-street spaces on Bridge Street, those will be dependent upon the construction schedule for the mixed-use development on the Durkee lot. So there has been limited progress on those, although additional survey work has been done. But for the expansion of the Broad Street parking lots and the construction of the Pavone lot, significant progress has been made. And as soon as we find it. Okay, so this is the current site plan for the Pavone lot. Of course, the footprint of Division Street will be incorporated into the new lot. The street will be abandoned.
So for context, that's Margaret Street to the
Yeah,
right.
Margaret Street on the
Yeah.
right, Oak Street on the left, the Strand up in the top left-hand corner.
Help me out again, why can't we have an ingress at Oak Street as well as an egress?
Because of that MLD switch right there, that would be difficult and expensive to move. It doesn't allow for a wide enough lane for both
Unless-
in and out traffic.
What
Unless we
about
wanted to
north?
get rid of a whole row of parking, which at this time, I don't think any of us would want.
So if you're saying you make that wider towards the north, you'd have to get rid of some of those parking spots?
You would have to get rid of some of the parking spaces, actually about half of them, I think. So there's 103 spaces. The handicap spaces you can see right along the border with the community bank lots. A new pedestrian sidewalk will be constructed there. The existing sidewalk on the church property next door, that will be left largely in place. So the pedestrian connectivity from Margaret Street to Oak Street, once construction is complete, will be pretty much the same as it is now. There'll be a sidewalk from one end to the other. Aside from that, and this has been submitted to the City Planning Board for an advisory review at their February meeting. Once we have their comments, the updated plans will be presented to the Common Council. Once they have a chance to take a look at everything and have their comments incorporated, the bid package for the project will be let out likely sometime in early March, with construction to follow hopefully immediately after abatement and demolition of the bank building, which is scheduled to start very shortly after the completion of the GEIS process as early as next week.
I see they already have equipment parked.
They do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why were the handicap parking spots chosen to be where they are? Why are they?
So originally, they were planned to be perpendicular spaces, but after the final survey work came in, the dimensions of the lot were slightly more constrained than we expected them to be. So rather than, we looked at a few options, and the one that left us with the largest number of spaces was this configuration here. But it does allow the handicap spaces with the requisite ADA required space on the left. I think that's an 8-foot sidewalk for them to, yeah,
Yeah,
for them to exit and walk out to Oak or
So
Margaret
what are the
Street.
total number of spots in this lot?
103.
103.
103,
So
yeah.
there's a loss of 6 spaces,
Yep.
which is reflected in the FGIS as well as all the comments that we have, well, all the information that we've talked about today incorporates that change of 6 spaces.
Yep. And per our recommendation to the council, should the council choose to implement the kiosk system in the off-street lots, and the construction drawings, there are concrete pedestals within the green grassy area adjacent to Margaret Street, and a third location on the Oak Street side of the lot. And-
It is a pretty long lot, so that
Yeah.
makes some sense.
Yep.
Mm.
And as we've been working with Community Bank over the course of this project, the city will maintain a mode of egress from their bank lot into the city lot, at which point their patrons can choose to exit either to Oak or Margaret Street.
Wait, say that one more time, please.
So the Community Bank lot, right there, you see the arrow going into our lot. That is currently the only mode of egress from the Community Bank lot is out onto Division Street. So as part of the plans for this lot, we worked with Community Bank. We made them comfortable that not only would that mode of egress be maintained once construction of the lot was complete, but we are also including requirements in the bid documents that the contractor maintain at least a mode of egress from the Community Bank lot either out to Oak Street or to Margaret Street for the duration of construction of the lot.
Oh,
They
okay.
have no choice.
So this
They
eliminates
can't-
Division
you can't
Street?
exit
Yeah.
on
This
Market
eliminates
Street.
Division Street, yep. And we'll lose 5 current on-street parallel parking spaces on the west side of Margaret Street for the new driveways, the new curb cuts into the lot. We will lose nothing on Oak Street because it's essentially the same exit as exists now.
And once again, those loss of the 5 is reflected in all the information we discussed today, as well as the FGIS.
Why are
Exactly.
we losing 5? Because there's currently curb cuts there too. There's the street on Division Street, and
There's-
there's a curb cut into the Glens Falls National. Isn't
Yep,
there?
just based on the
Oh, no,
current
that's off
configuration.
Division, it's my bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that section is, there's roughly in front of the Strand lot, where the Strand right there, and where the Glens Falls is, there's 9 spaces, and that's where we're losing on that chunk, so.
Yep. Any other questions on the Pavone lot? Let's move on to the Broad Street lot. So this is the current plan for the Broad Street lot. As is reflected in the FGEIS, currently there are 59 spaces in that lot. Post-construction, there will be a total of 80 spaces. There are minor improvements to the streetscape, the addition of a crosswalk across Durkee Street, which does not currently exist, and some work on the sidewalk to allow for a smoother grade down to the current level of the pavement. The lot is essentially being expanded towards the river. The overall configuration is not changing very much, but aside from a single permit that we are in the final processes of obtaining from DEC, there are no further regulatory hurdles to this. This has also been submitted to the planning board for consideration and advisory review during their February meeting, with a similar schedule to the Pavone lot, with a bid package to be released in early March, with construction to start hopefully as soon as the asphalt plant opens in the spring.
Are the lanes there, is that one-way circling, or is it two-way lanes?
Two ways.
It's two-way,
As exists now.
yeah.
So the conditions, the width of the aisle length has not changed in the current conditions, which is around 23.5 feet. So that will stay the standard.
I think there's, what, 2 compact spaces and 1 motorcycle? Is that
It's
what we?
right up here.
Yeah, where the existing transformers kind of shore up the geometry right up
So
at the corner of the lot.
hypothetically speaking, both these projects will then be done prior to any sort of elimination of the Durkee Street lot, correct?
Yep, that's a necessity.
So you can go out there with your clicker again, probably get some, because the patterns are gonna change. People are gonna change their habits where they park. As soon as this stuff becomes available, you know, the animals will find what works best for them, and that's what we'll do. The Pavone one will be interesting,
Yeah, well,
very interesting, and it'll change. You know, I know many a time I've parked in the community bank parking lot in the evening because that's the only place available when you wanna be on Margaret Street. So that might create some interesting results. But
It'll be
also
crucial.
give us a better insight as to how this is all gonna work prior to tearing up the rest of Durkee Street. And you'll get some accurate counts as to what's happening down there.
Yeah, that moment will be, and all that new information is gonna be critical for us as we move forward.
The spaces on the southern border that are ostensibly parallel parking, there wasn't any way to squeeze in more that was side by side down there?
that's what I was thinking, that's why if it was one-way,
Yeah.
can you make those perpendicular?
Correct, yeah, that's what I was just,
Cause
Yeah.
this is a small parking lot, I don't see why it couldn't just be counterclockwise.
You would have to, I mean,
Yeah, I believe that makes the drive aisles too narrow if you were to do that.
If it's just one way though, cause right now you have 2 ways.
right.
well, it depends on how
Just
you wanna look at the code. Code regardless if it's a one-way, if it's perpendicular, if it's one-way or two-way, says 26. Obviously, there's most all of our parking lots, and both private and public, is not following 26 feet. That's just, its Durkee lot doesn't have 26 feet wide aisles. There's certain sections of the Durkee Street lot where it's less than 20 feet, where you're near the existing poorly made boardwalk. So sometimes I backed out and you're on that. That's just the nature of the beast. So this, once again, it's already under 26, so it depends on how the city wants to move forward, if it feels it's safe. If the city could, the planning board made any comments and we said we wanna move that way and it's safe, then yes, we could go forward with that. It's a question of, at this time, we felt this was the best structure of the lot. That's just
changing
restriping.
lines too,
That's,
yeah.
that's not, extra construction, so that's, a year from now, we could go and restripe it, make it one way, put up a new sign.
So I guess that's an example of how we can increase capacity if there's an issue.
Yep.
Okay.
And there's some additional lighting to be installed on the new portions of the lot. But aside from that, there's not a whole lot more to this one. But again, it should start construction early in the spring.
Any sort of river access there? Any kind of scenic or park benches
Isn't
or?
the trail supposed to go through there?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
So the Saranac
Yeah.
River Trail does not go through there. So the Saranac River Trail actually,
Yeah, the
phase 2 of the Saranac River Trail will cut up around on what's going to be the north side of Broad Street there, and crosses where Ethan's showing there, and that's where the bridges are. Now, in
And actually,
the
phase
future-
2 of
Yeah, not through the parking lot, but
Saranac
right
River Trail
by.
Phase
Yeah.
2, the improvements actually terminate for that project prior to Durkee Street intersecting with Broad Street. So there are no planned improvements for SRT 2 beyond that point.
Right, but it's supposed to connect to the Riverwalk.
Yep, the
if you go
idea
around the
is
gateway
there's part of a
there.
Riverwalk that connects between Broad Street and the Gateway Complex down to the Riverwalk proper along the Saranac, which will go cut completely across the Durkee site all the way to Bridge Street and then across and down into McDonough Park.
But there are talks of like in the future making the Riverwalk go under the bridge along the river. It's a little like I know Ethan and I have walked under there, and it's a
Dicey,
Always
it's a little dicey.
Dicey.
There's generally homeless people seen under there, although there weren't last time we went. But it's low.
Yeah.
Also, the river there sometimes gets pretty high, and the river there is pretty intense. It would be
Yeah, you'd have to put a culvert under the bridge
Yeah.
abutment.
But I know the mayor has talked about maybe doing that in the future, especially on the northern end of the Durkee Street parking lot now, to connect to Monument Park.
Mm-hmm.
But those are
You know, it just would be
drastic
nice.
engineering projects. Yeah.
You know, it just would be nice if we could say, you know,
But as it will go, the river walk is going to connect to the Saranac River Trail, so it's going to go along the eastern side of the parking lot, along the eastern side of the Gateway building, cut across the southern side of the Gateway building, and
Yep.
connect to the Saranac River Trail Phase 2 along Durkee Street, and that's where the bridges are going to head over. So that would be nice to see when it's finished.
Yep.
Now, if you look right now, that if you've been over there, are steps that go up to that bridge on Broad Street. I think it's called Kennedy Bridge, but they're blocked off.
The staircase to nowhere, yeah.
Yeah, which is weird.
There was a dispute between ICV and the city about who's gonna cut the railing and put the.
So nobody
Yeah,
did.
I've heard a couple of
I heard it was a
reasons why
safety
that-
issue, like
That-
it was
that's
too
right.
close
Well,
to the
DOT
guardrail.
It was a DOT spec bridge, so chances are they put that box beam in, and they said that's it. You know, it was probably funded with DOT funds, I'm not for sure, but I'm pretty sure there's probably a grant involved in it. I know the guy that built the bridge, but that box beam came in, it was on the drawings, they made him put it in regardless of the stairs being in for
Mhm.
safety reason. Yeah, stairs to nowhere.
Yeah, it's fun.
And that's it for the parking projects. The other project is West Elcom Park, which of course doesn't have any parking, and the Farmers Market, which does have considerable additional parking, but that is outside the scope of what we're doing here because that's strictly for the use of the new destination that we're planning for the former MLD site. There's about 120 spaces that are planned for that complex down there. All right, moving on to discussion of the council recommendations from August 2019. Ethan, was there anything in particular you wanted to touch
No,
on?
this is just as a refresher. You
Good,
know,
'cause I
we made a bunch of recommendations back in August. A lot of them stuck to when the GIS process was complete. Obviously, that's a process that's lengthy, it involves a lot of steps, and it's about to finish soon. And so that, in that sense, is hopefully the common council will be able to look at our suggestions, especially the immediate considerations and the recommendations pending completion of the GIS. Say, we like this, we don't like this is what we're making our movements for, and that can give us a lot more clarity of exactly what next, how we're exactly gonna manage this, or how we're gonna make these tweaks, because they're gonna give us more. Because at the end of the day, as Mike said, we're just making recommendations, the council's the ultimate decision maker, because of course they are, because they're the elected body. So that's just something
So
to
we
look
can
forward to.
expect that once the findings are done for the GIS, the final GIS, that the council will start taking up those recommendations and making decisions?
Let's hope so.
That's on my list. Yep.
Who's the outdoor cafe czar in the city?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Who's the outdoor cafe czar in the city?
I think that's Beth.
Yeah, I think it goes to Beth.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the thing that bothers me is you've got Pizza Bono on the corner, he's got outdoor cafe. Across the street, you got Twisted Carrot Cafe, you got the Himalaya Cafe, and then you get on the Hobies, and he's taking parking spaces up, and his sidewalk is just the same width as the other guys. I mean, those are parking spaces you're losing, which, what makes him different from the other guys? If Twisted Carrot comes in and says, hey, I wanna go out in the street, you're gonna have to do it.
Who's this?
Ask.
Huh?
He's
No,
talking
but
Hokies.
they
Hokies
could.
thinks of parking spaces.
But what I'm saying is, the
Don't.
sidewalk's wide enough for
Oh.
the Twisted Carrot and Himalayan, they're fine on the sidewalk.
I mean, I may be speaking out of turn, maybe you know better. I thought that it was based on a total allotment of spaces that would be available.
It's 15.
Yeah, I
And
think
it
there's
was
a
still
total
under that.
number.
So,
Right, but I'm just saying, why give up some parking spaces when you don't have it?
oh, nobody
know,
could have them.
Again, that's a council decision
Yeah.
as far as.
Right, that's why I asked, who's the czar on
Common
outdoor
council.
Well,
cafes?
ultimately, it's the council, every year
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
approve so many
Okay.
spaces, they've gone
You
back
know,
and forth.
I'm just curious, you
On
know.
the total number, but.
You know,
they
we're
have to
talking
make the
about
decision.
parking
You're right, it
spaces
cuts
and being
spaces.
tight.
You know,
I mean,
that's,
I mean, what if Yamasushi wants to put in put in a cafe.
I think it's a first come, first served type of thing.
I
Well, but
believe
what I'm
it
saying
is.
is,
Yeah.
they could put it on the sidewalk and not be on the road.
I
Because
think
it's
it,
wide.
it
I think
comes- it
as
comes down
long
to
as
it's an
you're-
egress issue with ADA compliance too, I know.
I
that
guess
Joe
they
has
need at
involved
least a
in it.
3-foot width.
Yeah, I think it's first come, first serve, and as long as your proposal meets the specs, the city
I
doesn't have
understand that.
discretionary authority to deny the application.
I understand, but I'm just saying is, if Yamasisi wants to put a cafe outside, the sidewalk's wide enough to be on the sidewalk, won't ask for any parking spaces. They prohibit it from putting one out there.
They'd have to talk to probably Joe. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, that's
What I'm
probably
saying is,
a-
they shouldn't be, my point is.
Why, how did we get to this though?
You just
I'm
asked.
reading what we're,
Yeah,
continuation of
it's
the
on the
city policies, I'm
recommendations.
asking questions about it. That's why I asked first, who's the sidewalk cafes are in the city?
You know, we did make a recommendation on continuation
Yeah,
of those, so it's,
But
Appropriate.
I'm just looking at parking spaces, you know.
All right, but that's a good question, Joe. We can ask about
Yeah,
that.
okay.
If you
And
had
right
one
there.
building inspector to maybe make a comment about if it's a public safety issue, if it's not
But-
enough space.
But we're tight for parking spaces, so,
I know people
You know.
make applications, and so far they've all gotten granted.
Mm.
I know Peter
I understand
Estill-
that, they could be granted, but not be in the road because the sidewalk is wide enough on that side of Market Street where the Twisted Carrot and Himalayan just use the sidewalk, they're not asking.
Sure,
I
they
have-
don't do applications. Like,
I think the one that we're talking about, the Hobies on Margaret Street on that side,
What?
that, if I recall right, that's the last one that got put in there, and I have a
What?
feeling it was an egress issue and not having enough, does the sidewalk get choked down really bad?
I think it does. a
But the
little.
thing is, I don't wanna get into it, because it, you have to be contiguous to your establishment by New York State liquor law. You know, so if you're halfway into the, whatever, the secondhand store and all that, I mean, they get dinged for it, but, so we're giving them all that parking space wider than their storefront, you know, which isn't right. They got enough room on the sidewalk and not give up parking spaces. in the
Again,
city.
that's for the other table,
Yeah.
that's the table.
Okay,
This-
so I'll
this-
end it
this is
there.
not a
I'd like
hearing.
to know the
But yeah,
answer.
it's a reasonable question,
It's a
and we can
reasonable
look
question.
into that and figure that
But
out.
they,
But-
they pay a fee too.
I know that. I paid the fee downtown. And I took the hit from New York State, $1,000 fine.
For a parklet, you paid a fee?
No, because
You
that
didn't have,
little,
you didn't have a cafe?
No, for
that little
serving
cafe
alcohol
out front of
outside.
our house bistro, before it was all brick and I leased it from the city and did et cetera. But at that time, because you were crossing the sidewalk, a public area with a drink, you had to have a permit from the city, from the liquor authority. And I took $1,000 fine on that deal. Once they approved me, then everybody got approved.
Yeah.
So I took the hit. You know, but I'm just ask that question, please. Thank
I
you.
will. Any further comments on the recommendations from August?
Are there any other further recommendations down further even after authorized agreement with IPS?
Yeah.
I get an email
rough
from them
idea
at least
about
once a
permits,
month asking
you know,
what the status
monthly
is,
or
so
annual.
they're ready to go.
And then how we would, a rough idea of how we would separate them across the proposed at the time parking lots, which really hasn't changed. We still have the Arnie, we still have the Broad, we still have the Court, still have the City Hall Place, and still have the Public. So we talked about a rough idea for time limits, you know, through the week as where we have peak demand currently on the off-street. We have not discussed the cost of the permits yet, and and we said, obviously, recommendations sent to the common council once all costs of the new downtown parking system are known. So we still need to build out the parking, as well.
It seems like we should start having discussions with IPS, because I remember when we chose IPS, one of the biggest benefits, and Kate, you could probably, and you and Ronnie could probably help remind me of this, was that they did a permit system too. They had a.
Yeah, it's
They all
built into the
did.
software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they all did.
I think so too, but
Yeah,
I
I've
remember
got 'em
IPS
right
as
here.
being the best, sort of integrated permit system.
It was pretty slick.
well, but they can't start until the common council decides where you want to put them.
Sure.
Mhm.
Talked about how we want to obviously incentivize long-term parking on the off-street lots as much as possible by, you know, allowing permits. Once again, this is with the assumption that the SAD levy would be eliminated. So in replace property, a downtown resident such as myself would purchase a reasonably cost permit. I would park at one of these off-street lots instead of on-street in front of a business where I will either not get a parking ticket or disrupt valuable parking in front of a business. And then also talk about kiosks for individuals who potentially come into the downtown for a long time, need to park for longer than, let's say, the 2 hours, which would be on street. So it gives them an option, an avenue to move forward. Once again, staying at 8 to 5, rough idea, Arnie, as we talked about, a rough idea of 3 kiosks. Broad Street is 1 kiosk, 4th Street 2 kiosks, yada, yada, yada. SAD would be reduced or eliminated. As we talked about today, we would like to make some changes where the structure of the SAD exists, but the tax levy part is removed, which is still not necessarily out of line with this. It's just a little bit more specific on how that's going to move forward.
But if we just got rid of parking minimums, that would solve that problem too.
Yeah, I guess it would.
I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
hearing about this SAD thing for the first time tonight, so, but it sounds like you're into making sure that the planning board doesn't make sure, if someone renovates a 3rd floor in their building, they don't have to buy the building next to it and tear it down to build parking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's,
that's the
it's to
idea.
keep that beneficial structure of the SCD existing, so that exact scenario never plays out, while we can still allow development by using the mixed uses of parking spaces that we do have.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's been the best part of the SAD for the
Yeah.
most part, yeah.
we talked about, we had discussions about a rough idea for a snow ban removal system, where we talked about how currently on Durkee Street, on the north end or the south end, the parking that's available for downtown residents to park for snow bans is between 125 on one night on the north side to about 150 on the other. So we decided between all the lots and working with DPW is we have a system for that, the equivalent of 125 spaces to always be available throughout a snow emergency. Obviously, this will be still need to be fine-tuned with DPW, as they're gonna have to make some adjustments to how things are done, but that's a lot of the conversations we had in the middle of last year. So that was for the snow ban parking, and that was really, as specifically for our recommendations as of now, that's the summary. So, and then the other ones, of course, would be the conversion of 2 hours parking on street. So that doesn't mean we can't make more recommendations, or we can be more specific about any of these. That's just what we had at the August meeting. That's what we have come across, the general idea of how to move forward after the parking, the new building, the prime building is built, plus the new parking lots are there, a rough idea of how we're gonna start managing it, what we're gonna do during snow. And it's still up to us to fine tune that to a degree, so it's a workable system.
And once the finding statement is adopted by the Common Council, my office will have a discussion with the mayor's office about taking the Common Council's temperature, about implementing or authorizing some of the recommendations that we made for them to adopt pending completion of the GEIS. Any further comments? Okay, now on to the public comment period. Mr. and Mrs. Palkovic, if there's anything you'd like to add?
Thanks, this has been informative. I'm Tim Palkovic. My wife and I live in the city and are concerned about the development,
You live downtown?
not downtown, but on Champlain Street. We walk downtown often, yeah.
Good.
You have to excuse my COPD, but here we go. I have written a letter that might be useful because I used the final GEIS as a basis for these comments. Principally, those letters that are written there are used in this report, so they might be used. I have copies here if you're interested in it. The mayor and city council know that the downtown faces a prime LLC parking deficit. That is why they are considering elaborate signage and parking meters in a clumsy and ill-advised attempt to make up the loss. I'm sure I developed friends over that comment. The city is weak in its computation of parking spaces. They have computed 6 additional spaces after construction, when in reality there will be a deficit of 23 spaces. This is from Fuller Exhibits A. Additionally, the city neglects to recognize that on-street parking does not substitute for long-term parking. Carl Walker, City hired parking specialist says long-term parking should be replaced by an equal number of off-street, long-term parking spaces. The city plan does not follow this guideline. The city center may become a dead zone during the 18 months projected for the construction of the prime building. A severe loss of parking will exist for 1 to 2 years, depending on the construction. During this time, businesses will suffer and may close. The GEIS proposes parking in the city waterfront marina during construction. This is a walking distance of 3,200 feet. Industry standards consider maximum acceptable walking distance from 400 to 1,600 feet. This is from Fuller. The construction is an alarming prospect for this reason alone. The Durkee Street lot provides 65% of the long-term off-street public parking. These will not all be replaced, as stated by Sheridan Gardner, Clinton County Planning Department. Since Prime has not shown the floor plan for the below-ground parking, there is no way to be confident that a significant number of spaces will actually be available underground. They keep changing their plans to meet people's considerations, and there is no blueprint of spaces. Additionally, factors of snow removal and disability parking are not considered in the city parking plan. I might be wrong on those. Proposed diagonal parking on Durkee Street is inflated because of not allowing for code restrictions. Kenneth Bibbins, regional traffic engineer for the Department of Transportation, says that both Bridge and Durkee Streets do not have sufficient width to allow angled parking. In his concern for safety, he says that based on the concept of parking traffic implications, I would use the strongest language possible to discourage the institution of this change of diagonal parking on Bridge and Durkee Streets. There are additional safety concerns. The GEIS does not consider pedestrian walkability, bicycle paths, and safety. The proposed one-way Durkee Street will be deadly for bicycle traffic and unsafe for all traffic when cars back onto the roadway and when trucks make deliveries. Shouldn't the setback of the prime building be 5 feet like the Gateway building, not 3 feet? Insufficient setback forces pedestrians to walk near the roadway, creating a safety issue. We should not be crippling downtown businesses by removing parking to accommodate a large corporate building. The North Country Food Co-op will be especially hard hit. If the Durkee Street lot is destroyed, patrons will have to carry produce and other purchases long distance to their cars. Aesthetic concerns are that a huge building will be shoehorned into a site that is simply too small to exist comfortably. The immense scale of the prime building will suffocate the open space and displace parking in the city core for generations to come. So the references are available, and I have this sheet I can pass to anyone interested.
I would love one.
Yeah, I'd love a copy.
Can you just tell me again, you said something about the Carl Walker parking study with the off-street parking?
He said that
That's fine, I can make copies for that.
I can make copies, no problem.
Thanks.
Carl said that the number, he was hired by the city to do a traffic study, and he said the number of off-street spaces should be, long-term spaces should be equal to the number of off-street long-term spaces, and they're not in the proposed parking. They want to make equal spaces, but they're not all off-street long-term spaces.
Where does he say that in the he says that in the parking study?
Yes, I could.
I think he has it referenced in here.
I've referenced it, but I don't have the specific page numbers. The thing isn't paged. I used all the letters.
But if I remember correctly, I have the parking study here, and I haven't read it recently. But his number one thing about replacing parking was angled parking on Durkee Street and Bridge Street, right? Let me see.
Let's
That-
see,
the angled
there's the
parking-
Walker study and,
It's possibly on Durkee Street.
On-street
The-
angled parking, so in addition to including parking to meet the needs of the new development, the city should seek to add public parking as part of the development. Blah, blah, blah. Some of the opportunities to provide the replacement parking include on-street angled parking on Durkee Street. I know you mentioned that later, but,
Yes.
but you're saying that somewhere else in here, he says that all the off-street parking should be replaced with off-street long-term parking?
off-street long-term parking should be replaced under the revised plan with the same number of off-street long-term parking. They shouldn't be replaced with on-street parking, because off-street is long-term.
But on-street can be long-term too if we get rid of the 2-hour parking, right?
So that's something with this we've talked about a lot is when there's available parking in certain different areas, even if it's on street, let's say Oak Street, you have the church Monday through Friday right next to the church on Oak Street. That's parking that's not in front of a business, that if that was made the permit system allowed for long-term parking. So in that effect, it would be the equivalent of an off-street space, because it would be with that permit or the change of time limits, you would be able to park long-term. So that's something that we've talked about is with part of the permit, like as an example of why off-street in a management system, an off-street space can be treated as an on-street or vice versa. Because you have Court Street lot, which is 2-hour parking right now, which is the same thing as the on-street spaces, but it's technically off-street. So that would be something that when we add the permit system, people are gonna be able to park long-term there where they currently can't now. So that's something that, as Pat said, and I keep spewing out words, so I'm gonna stop, but
Well, you
Can
seem
change
very
that.
liberal in your concerns for people's parking, but I'm confused about the proposals to have kiosks and limitations of parking, because I think that will drive people away from downtown. We don't have that out at the malls, and people say, I'll go to the mall. There's no deal that I have to work with there. I'll just go to the mall and won't come downtown. I love this city, and I'm afraid that this parking issue alone, without the prime, will kill it. It could die during the period of construction. You'd think people walking down from the marina downtown 3,000 feet are going to do it? No, they won't come downtown. And meanwhile, in that year or two, when businesses can't have sufficient customers to stay open, they will close.
Mr. Pakovic, on that point, the proposals that this committee has debated in prior meetings for a temporary construction parking plan while the prime project is under construction does not contemplate the use of the marina lots at all.
Oh, that's good.
Yep, it contemplates.
That's not feasible.
No, because of the reasons you outlined. It contemplates the temporary redesignation of, again, on-street spaces for long-term parking for the duration of construction. And those sections of on-street parking which we've discussed are those which are deemed to pose the least amount of a threat to businesses who require on-street parking close to their front doors in order to bring in customers and patrons. So it will be close to the downtown core, but not close to businesses that require parking right out front.
I understand your concern. I appreciate it. I have a different opinion, but I don't know all the information that you do. I'm trying to give a different point of view so that you can take that in part of your consideration.
Sure.
Well, and I guess my question is, if there was a permit system allowing people to park long-term, or there was other systems, management allowed people to park long-term on street parking, let's say, would that alleviate some of your concerns that this needs to be off-street parking?
Well, I didn't understand your question.
So is,
Well,
I guess
So
my,
take the angled parking, for instance. If in fact angled parking is constructed along some portion of Durkee Street, you change it to one way, gives you enough room to put angled parking, you could treat that one of two ways. You could treat it as on-street parking with 2-hour limits, just like you do all the other on-street parking, or you could allow it to be used for permit parking. So someone could park there for 8 hours, you know, if you need, businesses need more parking for their employees, you could use that as long-term parking. It all depends on
Yeah.
what balance you need between long-term and short-term parking.
Yeah, I guess our point is that you seem to say that on-street parking is not a substitute for off-street parking.
That's the Walker study. That's what I'm quoting from the,
Yeah, he's saying that
The
the
vote.
Walker study had a statement in it that says you should create the same number of off-street parking after the development as you did before.
Yes.
If you
Well,
eliminate,
you're talking a one for one, but,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yes.
Ethan said, the plan that, I guess, is being proposed is a substitution potentially of making some on-street parking potential long-term parking, correct, for the kiosk system?
Yeah, and the
He's trying
Walker
the
study
construction period.
specifically
Yeah.
says a lot of the replacement should be on-street angled parking. But the difference then, I guess, was that we weren't enforcing the 2-hour parking. And now, currently, the city is enforcing 2-hour parking, which makes on-street parking rather temporary. But we've been talking about permits and other ways of managing the systems to, because the biggest parking issue, the biggest parking difficulty that we've seen to overcome is the Department of Social Services. The city
because
really
they have
only,
too many employees to park in the space that's available, is that?
we have about 150 vehicles
Yes.
on an average day that are
Yes.
utilized by DSS employees.
if you look at the parking counts, the only time we ever come near capacity is at the Durkee Street lot, or is when the Department of Social Services and all businesses, the county are in operation. That's why a need for a permit system kind of has been discussed, so that those people can have long-term parking spaces. And there's been discussions, ideas of maybe having on-street parking, certain roads or certain places for people to park with permits. But my question is, if there were ways for people to park long-term on-street parking, would that alleviate your concerns that on-street parking is not a substitute for off-street parking?
I'm not that informed of all this. I'm quoting the Walker study. I think he's right, but the subtleties of this are beyond me. I don't
Mr.
know.
Palkovic, could you,
Well, if I could just speak
Sure.
one issue, these diagonal parkings, I assume that the diagonal parking on Durkee and Broad Street will be eliminated. They are so unsafe, the letter in the DEG screams out that this is unsafe,
Well,
and I
that's
think it
because-
is. I'm just a guy, I can
Well,
figure that out.
to be clear, the letter from DOT was specifically speaking to diagonal parking on Bridge Street, not on Durkee Street, because Bridge Street serves as a state highway and is subject to much higher traffic volumes
Yes.
than Durkee Street.
300% capacity every morning.
Yes,
It's
but
really
the
people
DOT
stream
did
in
not
there.
indicate an opinion as to the efficacy of diagonal parking on Durkee Street. They did not address that.
I can find the place in the, I wish I'd brought my book. I didn't think I'd be able to talk to you guys. I'm thrilled, but I'm not prepared to, because I don't have the spaces marked in the book. These are the letters that are,
But the other
but
thing-
it's a short letter, and he highlighted his concerns in yellow, but it comes out gray.
Here it is.
It's,
So this.
that's it.
Yeah.
Based on the I would, the strongest possible language, discourage the institution of this change. He means diagonal parking on these two streets.
And when we saw this letter, we definitely, it did the diagonal on Bridge Street specifically, we stopped, and that's why we eliminated that. Because at one
Yep.
point, to help try to facilitate the co-op parking, we talked about the more diagonal parking on Bridge Street, specifically to help that co-op in that area directly.
That's what the
right
co-op told us that they wanted.
Mike,
Sir,
this-
and that's actually been tried before on Bridge Street, and it was a failure.
Yeah.
And
So
I
that's
think-
why it's not.
We
good.
dropped it
It's
from
been a
Bridge.
failure everywhere it's been
I-
tried. I mean,
it's-
they tried it on Court Street.
Yeah, they tried Court
That-
Street.
that was
It was
My understanding from
reverse
Court Street
diagonal,
is
and it was
the
forward.
type of angled
That was
parking that
reverse
they used
angle
was
parking.
backing
Oh,
into
yeah,
the
yeah.
space, which
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not
That was a
contemplating
disaster.
here.
Well, I
on
don't think
Bridge
Durkee
Street,
Street
it
is
was-
wide enough to support.
Well,
But that-
that's the point though.
It will be
Durkee
after the
Street is getting
reconfiguration.
wider with this development. Part of the
Is
thing,
it, is the street
part of
gonna
the
be
agreement
widened?
was
Slightly,
widening the
yes.
street.
How's it gonna be widened?
because they're
The prime
taking
property
some of the
Cutting into the
land.
parking lot.
build further back from the actual the existing road, so they're gonna have much more space. Actually, that sidewalk and pedestrian pathway that goes down Durkee Street, instead of being the path that exists that's about as wide as this, plus all the signs, it's gonna be, I don't have a site plan, I can't measure the site
We're
plan
looking
right
at
now, but it's
5
gonna
foot wide
be,
sidewalks.
it's gonna be more than 5 feet.
So
to the building.
if you look at the site plan, some of the diagonal parking actually crosses over onto the Prime property, and the city is working on an easement with Prime to allow for that and provide them with the proper indemnity and protection
So
from,
that road is gonna be widened.
Yes.
essentially,
Yeah, I
yes.
agree.
But
Durkee
part of
Street,
the
if it's
problem
made one way, would be
is
wide.
delivery
Yes.
by
And if it's
trucks.
made two ways,
That, trucks deliver along that street because of the restaurants on the next street over.
Mhm.
And now, people, if there's a truck stop there making a delivery, you can go around. It's illegal what people do. But if it's one-way traffic, everything's stopped up because they can't get around, because the cars parked there. And also, I hope bicyclers don't go down that street. It's a death avenue.
There's not currently a bicycle lane proposed for Durkee Street.
Well, that's
but
good.
To
I hope
your
people
point
don't
about-
go down there.
To your point about delivery trucks, the city is exploring alternative spaces for delivery
Only?
zones to be, yeah, either on Durkee Street to be used for deliveries only during certain times of the day, or at other nearby streets. For example, that small strip of Bridge Street between Durkee Street and Margaret, where trucks essentially use the right-hand lane as a delivery space anyway, and have done for years without official sanction. The city could institute a formal loading zone right there to replace the one that is currently on Durkee Street.
I also agree with Dave Merkel 100% that the southern seats that are right next to Ashley Furniture on Bridge Street should be removed and that be made a loading zone. But those are other things
As
to
well.
discuss.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate your talking to me. I didn't think I'd even have minutes to speak with this. And the council, the mayor uses an egg timer to make you sit down, so thank you so much.
I think
Thanks
that
for coming.
in the day, a lot of the concerns you brought up, I think it's tough to always watch these videos or come here to these meetings because they're fun and long. I'm sure Mike's enjoying it right now. But a lot of these concerns that you have, we've talked about probably at more than some of us would like. But we've had these concerns about the loading, about how angled parking could work.
And it's changed over time.
And it's changed over time because of these conversations. So a lot of these concerns, we believe that we're working towards a solution to this, you said the snow ban. Now we're no longer considering the harbor side parking as an adequate replacement parking or for temporary parking. So a lot of these concerns that you brought up specifically, we've talked about, we've considered, and that we're still working on. So-
I'm relieved that you have. I was just going by the DEG report, what was available to me. Your deliberations were not available to me.
Sure.
So now they have them. I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. I've never been to one of these meetings before, and it's nice to see how you're working and what you're doing. I have some, you were at the, Matt, you were at the
The
zoning
ZBA
board-
meeting?
The zoning board meeting, right? And, remember Turner was talking about the amount of parking that they were gonna have underground
Sure.
for Prime? And he said they were gonna allow 1.5 space per unit, have I got that right?
1.5 spaces per residential unit.
And what is that? Yeah, okay, 1.5 space per residential unit, whether it's a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Well, sir,
So-
but obviously there's not 1.5 space.
yeah, nobody has a half a car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But anyway, so,
I think the 3 bedrooms would get 2, or I don't know how they do it.
right,
A
and
2-bedroom
and
would get
a
2.
couple of women who were property managers spoke, who have property and have to manage parking, said this is
Is what?
a way, two of those women, two of those
Yes.
ladies who came and were property managers,
Yeah, Diane, I think Felix spoke and so.
I don't remember what their names were, but they said that is a wildly overly optimistic
Yes.
in reality. And then that gentleman at the end got up and said, yeah, you got a 1-bedroom, you probably got 2 people in the bed, 3 if they're swingers, he said.
Mhm.
So, and the fact is that if the rents you're going to be, the Prime is going to be wanting to charge people. And it is said that it's looking for people who make $70,000 a year. A lot of people who are in these one-bedroom apartments, two-bedroom apartments, they are going to be having roommates because there aren't that many $70,000 a year people, I think, to come in and get these units. So that means 2 cars, 3 cars, 4 cars, maybe, if they're all out working to support the
Well,
rent.
there is a difference between a single structure where you have maybe 2 or 3 residential apartments on the upper floors and a very large apartment complex where you're dealing with 115 residential units. On the smaller scale, there is more pressure to provide for off-site parking for your residents. If you're dealing with 115 different units and you set a baseline, and there are a specific number of spaces assigned to you, and if you have visitors coming, they do not park underground in the underground garage. They either find an open space in the surface lots, or they park elsewhere in the downtown area.
But
and
that's
they
what
walk.
will happen here. You're going to, a lot of your tenants, if, let's assume you have a good tenancy rate, there are going to be people who are not going to be able to park under the garage. So some of those 90 spaces that we're losing might come into play, because they're going to be out trying to get as close to the apartment as possible.
Well, this is why enforcement's important, I think. But there's a few answers to this. One is that this apartment complex is downtown, whereas Enclave Estates, these others aren't downtown. Those are car reliant. The hope here, and people will disagree with me here, that the people that are gonna be drawn to downtown living is to be within walkable distance. And it's to go, to be able to walk to the Twisted Carrot, to be able to walk to Himalaya, walk to Sick, and the prime people that these are presented to are empty nesters, people whose children have moved out. Certainly it's open to everybody, so we don't know.
So it's going to be a retirement community.
No.
Well, that's what you're making it sound like.
Well, that's actually their targeted demographic
This is
is
targeted-
Oh,
active
but they
seniors
said in the
And
DGEIS
young
Mhm.
users.
that
and young
this was
urban
going to be
professionals.
filled by young professionals and by net newcomers. Be filled by net newcomers, not the folks had their houses up in the West End and kids have gone to college and are out and they want to live downtown.
Well, you could disagree with that. We'll see what
But
happens.
that's what it says,
But
net newcomers, not older people. So if they're targeting that, they didn't say that in the
But the
DGEIS.
people that they're looking for are people that are into downtown living, and I'm sure there will be people that might want to get rid of a car and share a car and be able to walk on a daily basis. The
It's all
part of this
great
project
theory.
is to make the downtown more walkable, to lower reliance on cars. If you look at the Carl Walker slideshows, you can see that Plattsburgh has the highest by national average, by other local cities, Glens Falls, Lake Placid, Burlington, I think were the ones he used, where people drive alone, lowest amount of people walking. So, this is adding sidewalks in, and this is wider, but here's where also enforcement comes in. Here's where the harbor side can be used. If you want to have 3 people living in a 3-bedroom apartment and all of them have a car, then Prime might only give them 2 parking spaces, whereas the third one park. This is where one of them would have to park down at the harbor side. Parking down at harbor side is not a realistic option if you want to go to lunch at Olive Ridley's,
Mhm.
or if you want to go to Iris's for dinner. But
Or if you want to, if you're walking in the snow to get to your car after one of our snow events.
I might disagree with you there a little bit, because when there's a snow event, everyone has to go out and I spend an hour shoveling my driveway in the morning.
I live on a corner on Champlain Street.
You get 2 sidewalks.
No, listen, we got 2 sidewalks, we have 3 cuts. One is one that was put in by the city for the previous owner. Cut on the corner of Beaumont, cut on the corner of Champlain. And when the plow comes, he comes off Lafayette Street, plows down Beaumont Street where there are no driveways on our side, fills up one cut, fills up the next corner cut, fills up the next corner cut, and the next big open space is our driveway, so I know about shoveling. I know about shoveling.
Everybody does.
Yeah, but-
It's a
But I
hazard
know,
for the-
I know about shoveling out a driveway that's been hit by a city plow.
But I'm just saying, if people want 4 cars, if people wanna have their girlfriends come spend the night, if people want to have, people could have a 3-bedroom apartment in the prime development, let's say, and want to have 4 of their friends over for the weekend. So then they have 3 cars, and that's 7 cars if
Mhm.
all of them show up alone. And, you know, that's where, and
Yeah, I mean, if
cities
you're
do this
talking
all the
about,
time. They would have to go park in the harbor side, which is the overflow, unlimited parking. There's gonna be over 500 spaces down there. And their friends would go pick them up, the ones, and this is what I used to do when I lived in New Jersey. We only had 1, parking spot for our apartment. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. I had to rent a space at the municipal library. And, when people would come to visit, they might park over there too, and we would either get rides or they'd have a long walk. It's certainly, anybody that's gonna live in that spot might have to make, those are part of the calculation that people would go if they wanna live here. If they wanna
Well,
have a
if people
house
are being
with
offered
unlimited
really
parking.
nice apartments that start at $1,200 a month, and somebody was telling me, yeah, but you may have to park down there at Harborside, I go, I'll go look somewhere else, thank you very much. I wouldn't do it.
well, I think the scenario
yeah,
that Pat is
so-
talking about
Right.
is when you've got several
Party
people
time.
living in the same apartment that have access to multiple cars, where you would only need access or use of one car maybe once a week, once every other week. So rather than paying
Yeah,
for
but
an
I'm not
additional
buying
parking
it.
space.
I mean, I'm not
So
buying
they're
that.
speaking a lot for Prime right now and what their
Yeah.
intentions of the
Yeah.
site
Yeah.
are.
But, I mean, I'm just talking about the parking that's
Yeah.
being offered by Prime, so
And
that's,
so
I mean,
with the 1.5, what they're basing that off of is their history. I think Matt said, and it's part of their application, their background is, they manage currently over 2,000 apartments, all of them, a variety of different locations. And what they're doing is they're basing off their previous experience, and they're gonna make that argument to the planning board
But
as
they're,
allowed in the code.
and this building that they're putting in here is like their standard big building. It's their cookie cutter building. And so we're part of their cookie cutter. We're part of the dough they're cooking up, they're gonna cut up.
Well, they're basing their analysis on methods that have worked for them in other scenarios, and very
And
similar
is every
scenarios to what
city
we're
that
talking
they've
about
done
here.
it the same situation as Plattsburgh?
No, and every
No, of
project
course
has
not.
been a little different. When they talked about, you were at the zoning board meeting yesterday, so they talked about their parking counts and how they wanna change. Another argument they'll make in front of the planning board is what they view as should be a parking count for the commercial space. Some people may agree with it, some people may not. And they referenced a project called the Hamlet down Saratoga Springs, which is outside the downtown, very
Yeah, they said,
isolated.
and it has to be, it mainly has to be accessed by car because it's
Yeah,
so far
exactly.
outside of town.
And so what they're doing there is, so it's a different, it was more like 50 apartments and a lot more commercial space, much more commercial space, which by our code and everything that we're
It's
talking about
far
now
more intensive for
requires
parking
more
requirements.
parking,
Mhm.
is what we've all believed, and that's what the argument we've all made. And what they've used there is that information that they have from there, which is much more car intensive and has more commercial space, trying to look how that could play here and how the project fits in our downtown. So yes, they use similar examples from their past, but that's what we that's their historical data to back it up. So the planning board might say, hey, we don't agree, it should be
Yeah, so you either-
1.75 instead of 1.5, and then Prime has to make adjustments from there.
Yeah, so I mean, you either accept their data
Yeah,
that worked
exactly.
in wherever.
So they're trying to base
Or
it
you
off as
don't.
much as past historical data as.
Okay,
Mhm.
now, I got a couple other things here, though. What is the estimated cost to install and maintain the parking meters? What's it gonna cost the city?
They're expensive.
Well, but any idea?
The proposal from IPS, I think the hardware cost and software included was somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 per kiosk.
$445,000.
That was for their initial application, which included how many, 40, 60
Yeah, that included-
kiosks?
50,
And
60
now we're
kiosks.
talking about roughly 8, based on those recommendations from the August meeting, we're talking about 8 to 11.
So that's all through all the parking lots, they'll be between 8 and 11?
Total, yeah.
Based on
somewhere-
our recommendations, the
Yeah.
council.
So, somebody parks their car, they gotta go find the kiosk.
If they don't have a permit, for for example.
if they don't have a permit.
Yeah.
How much are the permits gonna cost?
That, we talked about in part of our recommendation, it would be based off of the total cost, because the idea when you move to this,
They haven't made the decision yet.
yeah.
Yeah.
And how long do they estimate that it's gonna take before these kiosks and these meters start paying for themselves?
Well, the
So it
intention is
depends
to
on the
have
prices,
the intention is to have the system pay for the administrative costs of the system and any debt service payments incurred in the capital outlays required to get the system up
And
and
then
running.
So
anything
the
after
goal
that
is
goes to
year-
the city as income?
Anything after that goes to the city, but it's important to distinguish between money going into the general fund for
Mhm.
any purpose and money, and this is another recommendation of the board, any money generated by parking kiosks or by permits be put into a special fund to be specifically used for downtown improvements, streetscape improvements, so that people can see what they're getting
So it's-
when they pay for
So it's not a
parking
political
downtown.
football that funds the next
Mhm.
person's pet project.
Okay,
It's-
now,
it's
The city also
sensitive.
gets over $800,000 in grants for setting up.
And that's another good point.
Okay, so about the snow events, you talked about 125 parking, parking spots for people who have to park their cars off-street, and that's based on what you've already got in the Durkee Street lot?
Yes, so on the
Okay.
north lot is when, since
And-
DPW divides it in half.
And so, if you move on to several parking spots, parking lots scattered around the city,
Mhm.
in the event of a snow emergency, you don't have one centralized place that people can go to park their cars,
No.
which means that they're going to have to take their chances on Broad Street, if not on Broad Street, take their chances in Arnie Pavone's place. So you could have an increase in traffic during a bad snow event of people just trying to find a parking spot. Has that been considered?
Well,
You lost
possibly,
me.
but we're talking about a distance of 2 or 3 blocks.
But you're talking about trying to get your car out of the snow, into a parking lot, find a spot. Maybe there's not a spot there, you have to get it back out onto the road during a snowing event, try to take it to another parking lot, get in there, see if you can find a parking spot.
Well,
Typically, when the snow events are.
And I'll let Mike
It's
speak to
done,
this.
yes, lots of times it's done
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
but
We put the lights
that's a
on.
good, that is a good point.
We
I give you
make
that.
sure that we give you adequate time to lights. Occasionally, we miss. I'm
Mhm.
not a weather forecaster.
Yeah,
by any
that
means.
is a good point, I'll give you that one.
But we have to further, we talked initially about, do we keep one lot open, like say the Arnie lot, the first day, we keep it all open, that's where all the parking is.
And
We talked-
designate it for,
And then we had those discussions.
that would
and we
be,
all-
that would actually be a very good solution.
And the way we
Mm-hmm.
have our snow ban recommendation now is, once again, it's not changing infrastructure, it's just a matter of reallocating. So if we do a snow ban, we do a first year of having the Arnie, the way we talked about in this recommendation, the council, it sounds
I've
council
gotta
says
go out
yes.
there and I've gotta make sure that the public can navigate through these parking lots. I have to provide adequate parking space, and it's a struggle, I'm not gonna kid you. Okay? Every time we do this, the only thing I can do is try to make it go fast. Okay, try to get the snow up off the ground as quickly as possible. And that's
So you're
all
the-
we- that's
you're
all
the
we
snow
can do.
czar?
Huh?
You're the snow czar?
I'm one of two.
Okay.
My boss is not here to represent today, so I am. The bottom line goes is we're gonna inconvenience people no matter what we have, whether it's the Durkee Street parking lot or 3 or 4 parking lots scattered throughout the city.
Mhm.
It's, cars are our worst enemy. People, fortunately, the last snow event, which is actually, we haven't had one this big in quite some time. This is a real challenge.
Yeah.
We got the lights on early, the forecast was pretty good.
Yep.
People got off the streets, we were able to push back, and we had a little lull there.
Yep.
But the north and south sides of the Durkee Street parking lot, that's always a challenge. Again, people behave, I don't think we have many people towed, right, Levi?
Last one was under 25.
Yeah.
And that's not many? Oh, wow.
No, we,
Citywide.
Oh,
Citywide,
citywide. Okay,
citywide.
well, that isn't bad.
No,
Yeah, that
but
isn't.
we also, usually the first snow events take it over. Anyway, let's get back on topic. One of the challenges we face is, people during the daytime hours during a snow event are gonna park on the north end. So typically, we'll put a south end, we'll have a parking ban in effect. North end during the daytime hours I can't get at it until after midnight.
Mhm.
So we still try to get through there and open them up without causing too much grief.
And where do you put the snow?
We usually stack it in one portion parking lot, then snow elves go out at night and we take it away.
So if you're stacking snow, how are you gonna do it in these other lots?
So there, I'm gonna have to find a spot to stack it, or I'm
Okay.
gonna truck it away.
Any idea
That's what
where-
we did last night, we had.
Yeah, so say, I hear you guys sometimes just like dump it in the
Yeah, I
Saranac.
think
Well, they
that
actually
needs
go
probably
down
not-
to the Harborside parking lots and dump it there, and it stays there until it melts in the
You
spring,
know,
and
that's a
then they
nice
clean it up.
parking lot, that's a nice area. It's a shame that we're not doing something down there, and not necessarily in lieu of the Durkee Street parking lot, but it's just, that is wasted space right
Yes,
now.
it is.
Yes, it is, and the
Really
city
is.
did
It's
just
one
get
of the
about
biggest
$130,000 for a master planning grant to figure out exactly what we're gonna do with that space down there, so that'll come together over the next year.
Okay, this goes back to having the parking lots scattered around the city. Has there been any study or any consideration given to how that may change traffic flow?
Yes, so there was a traffic study.
Yeah, okay.
And, but generally, the GIS talks about how the traffic mitigation is minimal. And Carl Walker, that was one of his biggest things. His name's not Carl Walker, I guess, but
Yeah.
John Forrester. That was one of his he's like, this is gonna improve parking because the parking in the city right now is abysmal. We have this big parking lot on the south end side of downtown that's far away from a lot of things. But there's not a lot of parking throughout unless it's private and they don't let you park there. But he talked about quite a bit how a much more balanced parking system so that there'll be parking at Arnold Pavone, there'll be parking down on Durkee Street, there'll be more parking over at Court Street, will lead to much better customer service as far as parking. Because like I said, if the Durkee Street lot is full and the only spots that are available are on the southeast side of the Durkee lot, that's far away from a lot of things. It's uphill to most things.
Especially if you're working on Margaret Street.
If you're working on Margaret Street, if you
I-
want to eat at all of Ridley's and you're
Yeah,
parking
I understand this now.
And speaking to your question about any inconvenience that might result from a traffic circulation standpoint, the parking study that was completed as part of the DGEIS contemplated all of the new projects, all of the new parking lots, Durkee Street maintained as two-way, Durkee Street converted to one-way. The result of that study, there were several, and they based these things based on the number of seconds you wait at any given intersection. In no case did the wait which you experience at any intersection that was studied exceed more than 5 seconds more than you experience right now.
And they didn't have traffic, were they counting traffic?
They count traffic,
Okay.
and then they have a series of statistical models that they use to map out exactly the effects that
Okay.
proposed projects will have.
Then this other, with the parking lots being scattered, I noticed on that plan for the Broad Street parking, I didn't see any handicap parking there.
There are, I believe, 4 handicap spaces
Okay, I didn't see
on
anything
the
marked.
western
But
side,
are
right
each of them
next to
going to
Durkee
have
Street.
handicap parking
Yeah,
spots?
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
exist
They ha-
currently,
and
and
is-
it fits the same, the ADA compliance,
Okay.
it still fits.
Okay. And I asked you about parking permits. Kathleen, I do want to correct you on something.
Sure.
Okay. The city is not giving the Durkee Street parking lot away. Prime is paying $1.
Correct.
Okay, I spoke at one of the
Yes.
council meetings, and I
I
pulled
hope
up.
you
I
stand corrected.
stand corrected.
Yeah, well, I pulled out, Kathleen, I pulled out my wallet, and I slapped $2 down on the dais, and I said, here, I'll give you $2, leave the Durkee Street parking lot
I'd
the way
make
it
it
is.
5.
You made it 5? Well, I'll see your 5 and up your 5. Okay, so, anyway, now, I know they didn't make a decision on the pilot last night.
Mhm.
And there was just a report on on T.D. Kelly, I don't know what her last name is.
But
Oh.
Wait,
Yeah.
let
we know
me
nothing
finish,
about the
let me
pilot.
finish,
Okay?
okay? Thank you. And then you can tell me. But, they were discussing Prime is getting this, well, if the pilot goes through, Prime is going to not bear the tax property burden, okay? And this is a big issue for the school board, and it has been, you saw Mr. LeBrun's letter, I'm sure you're sure. And the estimate from the city is that this is going to increase this is going to increase our benefit by over $3 million. The school board says if they're, and I think they're estimating this on the number of children that will be going to the school.
Mrs. Pavlik, I know this is a reasonable concern, but it's beyond the purview of this board
I
to
know,
discuss the pilot.
but what I'm saying, but this ties back to, in
Okay.
a very
You know, it
circular way.
doesn't- Again, like I had the conversation earlier, man, I hate to cut you off. We're here tasked with one task only, and that's to try to make recommendations based on parking, not.
Well, this ties
not-
back, this
let
ties
me
back to
finish,
parking,
man.
okay, I'll
Not
give,
talking about the project as a whole, we're only here to talk about parking, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's
Even the
absolutely
common
right.
council doesn't have control.
Yeah, this is, unfortunately, we can't,
but all I'm saying is that if we are going to be the ones who are footing the bill for prime property, and on top of that are paying for the parking that we have to use to come downtown, I haven't seen any proof of anything, any concrete proof that it's going to be worth my while to bring my car down to the city of Plattsburgh and pay for parking.
That's what we're trying to fix.
What are you gonna bring in? Oh, that's not your purview, I'm sorry. But,
But you wouldn't have to pay for parking if you were parking less than 2 hours.
So that was one of our recommendations.
If
The
the common
recommendation is
council
all free
adopts it.
parking for 2 hours at a time.
well, who's to say I'm not gonna be here for more than 2 hours? So if I'm gonna have to haul my car back up home in less than 2 hours,
Or go around the block and park in another parking spot for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
But it's really
but give me a reason to come down
The
and do
paid
that.
parking is gonna be primarily for people who are parking all day long.
But, give me a reason to come down,
I agree.
We'll work on it.
I mean,
Hopefully, that's what, by reinvigorating downtown, we are going to, instead of having the businesses that are relocating somewhere else, will have a
Yeah.
reason to stay here because they'll have more
Because they'll
people
have
that will be,
That'd be great.
225
too,
people
and-
with disposable income within easy walking distance of every restaurant and shop in the center of the city.
And as Roxella will tell you, the parking, people do pay for parking, he pays for parking.
yeah,
So,
Yeah, Joe
It's
reminds
never
us of
free,
that.
it's just what form you're paying for it in.
but yeah.
Mrs. Palkovic, it has been quite a while, so if you don't mind,
you'd like to go home.
we would.
Me too.
Okay.
Okay, and,
I still don't agree about the paid parking, but I do feel better about it, if you're talking about it, that you consider it, that you're thinking about it. You're not trying to banish people from downtown, which what it seems like to me is the person sitting up in my little house.
No, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do.
From the truth.
Yeah.
The whole point is to help businesses. And unfortunately, there's study after study showing that free parking is not always the best case for businesses. Reinvigorating downtown, people don't come downtown, and as Kate was saying, the businesses are already closing. People need reasons to come downtown. They don't come downtown for parking, they're gonna want a place to park to come downtown. And it's important that we give them that, but there's a lot of considerations. Parking is very complex.
You made your point
Yeah.
clear, and I appreciate it.
but people also aren't gonna come down to look at a new parking building either, and that's not your purview, but this is sort of the heart of it. And there's no point arguing it here because it's not within your purview, and I understand that. But be aware that that's a big concern.
Yeah, this
Mhm.
form is not for that,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, we
like
do
I said,
appreciate you guys attending and
attending
bringing
and-
these things
And
to our
we'll be
attention.
attending more than we're sure.
No, of course.
I'll
All are
bring
welcome.
cookies next time.
everyone-
All right, motion to adjourn?
I'll
Is there
second.
anything-
Second,
I'll
all in
second.
favor?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
You too.
When you, did you walk the minutes?
I'm sorry.